Do you think analytics are overrated?
I don't give a damn what the analytics say.
Sick of hearing about numbers?
And analytics don't work at all.
Too bad. Jonathan Von Tobel does the numbers on The Edge.
Get those nerds! Nerds! Nerds!
You know we love to do this. Asking in Point Spread Weekly as well. A deeper look at what we have seen from the weeks prior to maybe find some edges that the market has not realized.
All right, let's do it.
Talked about last week the Raiders and the Panthers and maybe their fraudulent cases, right? And what happened over the weekend, it actually kind of showed up in their 2 losses. And I thought, like, the theme for me this week, Youmans, and I wrote about it in Point Spread Weekly, was essentially like perception is not reality. We watched 3 undefeated teams lose by an average of 12.6 points over the weekend. So we don't really know that much about a lot of these teams. It's really important to look at some of the deeper stuff behind some of these squads. So let's take a look at the Buffalo Bills, because as Mark Lawrence, who was just with us, talked about, they're going to get a lot of credit for what they've done defensively. And you deserve credit for what you've done up to this point.
Sure.
But it should be noted what you have done it against. So you have their 4 opponents up to this point. Across the board statistically, look at some of these offenses that they have faced. In terms of scoring, the best offense they have faced, the Washington football team, 11th at 25.2 points per game. With the rest of their opponents, 28th, 31st, and also tied for 28th, the Houston Texans. 16.8 points per game and 15.5 points per game. If we're talking about yards per play, the Miami Dolphins dead last at 4 a pop, 4.9 for the Pittsburgh Steelers, 26th, 29th be the Houston Texans. I'm going to get to the Washington aspect of this too, because there's a conversation about your defense only being as good, right, as the opponents that you face. From a PFF grading standpoint, none of these teams ranking higher than 24th by PFF standards in terms of offensive grading. The best being Washington at 24th. You get 2 teams tied for 29th, and the Dolphins and the Steelers at 61.1 PFF graded, 58.6 dead last for the Houston Texans. And then DVOA standards, again, Washington leading the way at 13th, and then you get these other teams, right? The Steelers at 25th, the Dolphins at 28th, and then, of course, the Houston Texans at 30th. And keep in mind, that's greatly inflated all of those offensive numbers for the Texans, because Tyrod Taylor was great in the first game and a half for this team. So they've been atrocious.
And since Davis Mills has taken over, it's been the worst offense in the NFL by far.
Yep.
By the way, for those who don't know, can you explain the DVOA?
So
because I think there are a lot of people who have no clue what that even is.
Essentially put, it's Football Outsiders metric, and simply put, if you look at like Washington, for example, they are 3.8% better than an average offense, right? That's the way you can look at this. So from a defensive standpoint, you want negative numbers. From an offensive standpoint, you don't want it to be, right, 26.1% worse than an average offense, things like that. So it gives you an idea just how these perform. And you look at PFF grading. PFF grading, I think you can take it as with a grain of salt, because they grade a certain way, right? But it gives you an idea at least of how these offenses are performing, because they'll look and they'll grade, they'll play design, how these plays are operating, everything like that. They take everything into account. So it's not the perfect system, but it's one to give you an idea. But generally across the board, you can see how poor these offenses have been. And you could take a look, you can say, okay, well, what about Washington in that game? Washington in that game actually averaged 5.8 yards per play, had a 75-yard touchdown. Like, they actually did some things well. It was Tyler Heineke turning the ball over. And again, the Bills get credit for that. But this is a completely different monster now in the Kansas City Chiefs. This is the top-ranked offense in the National Football League by a lot of metrics, whether it's going to be DVOA, PFF grading. They're coming off of their best performance of the season, in which they picked apart the Philadelphia Eagles. Patrick Mahomes threw 5 touchdowns, also threw an interception. All right, 471 yards, 7 yards of play. This is something completely different than what the Buffalo Bills have seen. And I will again go back to last week. Who was the top-graded defense going into last week? That was the Carolina Panthers. They were leading the league in a lot of pressure categories, everything like that. And what happened? They gave up 7.7 yards per play, got 36 points dropped on them. A lot of the times, your defense is only as good as the offense you were taking on. And on the flip side of this, because I think there's something to be said about this offense, so we'll leave Josh Allen aside, because, you know, I've been picking on Josh Allen a little bit.
A little bit.
Just a little bit. But if you look at it from an overall offensive standpoint, the Bills, 16th in offensive DVOA, they're average, negative 0.1%, 21st in PFF grading. Their offensive line, 30th in terms of pass blocking at this point right now. Josh Allen himself has been pretty poor against pressure. And here comes Kansas City, 6th in pressure rate at this point right now in the National Football League defensively, 7th in the amount of times that they're going to blitz. They're going to go after Josh Allen here. And you brought up the point yesterday. Josh Allen's not Patrick Mahomes, right? I think we can agree on that if you look at what he has done up to this point right now. And so I think overall, this leads me to think, I just think that the Kansas City's a little undervalued here.
Well, the numbers show that.
Right.
I think the numbers also show Buffalo's defense is probably not as good as what Mark Lawrence said, the number one defense in the league, because you faced 3 of the worst offenses in the NFL at this point. And that's why you got to look inside the numbers. And that's another reason I like the Chiefs. I think it's a big step up in class, not only the entire offense, but just the quarterback. Look at the quarterbacks the Bills have faced at this point. An old Big Ben, the Tua Brissett combo.
Yep.
Taylor Heineke and Davis Mills. You don't get much worse than that at this point in the NFL. And now you're going to face Patrick Mahomes. So
especially when Heineke's by far and away the best quarterback that they faced up to this point, right?
Exactly.
So now I think you're in on me with this. Oh, I know you are. We're both on the Chiefs minus 2.5. I think I'll have a hard time convincing you of this. But the Cleveland Browns, I think one of the things that has stuck out through 4 games now is how dominant they have been defensively. And we'll get to again because we're making the case, hey, you've played nobody. What about the Browns? But look at some of these numbers for the Cleveland Browns. From a PFF grading standpoint, second in the National Football League at 80.4. You look at their DVOA grade, third best in the National Football League. Yards per play, they've only given up 4.5 per play. That's second best in the NFL. Rush yards per attempt at 3.1. They're absolutely great against the run, second. And in terms of overall pressure rate, fourth in the NFL at 30.1. How about this, by the way? Fourth in pressure rate, but they have the 22nd highest, or we'll call it 8th lowest, or whatever it is, blitz rate. They're not blitzing anybody.
Right.
It's Jadeveon Clowney and it's Myles Garrett just getting after opposing offenses. And here's the thing. They have all these numbers. They have faced the Kansas City Chiefs, best offense in the National Football League, like we just talked about. They faced the Minnesota Vikings, who have the 7th best passing attack in the National Football League from DVOA standards. And overall, they think they're 14th in that regard. So their running game needs a little bit of work. But they have been tested in certain categories, right? The Cleveland Browns.
Sure.
And they have passed those tests. This front seven has been absolutely dynamic in terms of what they've been able to do from a defensive standpoint. How about this against Kirk Cousins? Pressured on 19 of 20 true pass sets last week. He went 6 of 19, 2.4 yards per attempt. And this week, they get the Los Angeles Chargers, who are 27th in pass blocking, that has allowed Justin Herbert to be pressured on 48.4% of his true pass sets. Brian Bulaga, report says, no official timeline when he's going to come back. So we're still going to get another game of Storm Norton. At the beginning of the week, right, we were talking about this on opening lines. I was like, pick. It's kind of surprising given what we have seen and all that. But I thought a deeper dive into Cleveland, I kind of understand why it was floating around pick and why it's just 1.5. And I think the Browns are going to be extremely live against LA this week.
Oh, they should be. No question. And you're talking about the Chiefs when they had to move the ball against the Browns, they did. To win that game, Tyrod Taylor moved the ball against the Browns in the first half. And then after that, the reason I was somewhat skeptical is they faced Davis Mills and then they faced Justin Fields. Right? And but they answered my questions last week by shutting down Kirk Cousins and the Vikings for 3 quarters. So I was leaning Chargers. I jumped off the Chargers side. I am not on that, and I'm going to pass on that game. But your point about the offensive line is fair, too.
Yep.
I thought before the season on paper the Chargers were going to have a really good offensive line. But without Brian Bulaga, right now it's just you're not seeing those results on the field. So, I'm not going to be making a case for the Chargers this week.
And you get also on the flip side really quickly, one of the best running games in the National Football League, taking on a team that by Football Outsider metrics in terms of run defense, 25th or lower in every single category, and that would be the Los Angeles Chargers.
So that was a mistake the Raiders made, not trying to run the ball, where they just weren't effective running the ball against the Chargers. All right, what else do you have?
And last one here, we don't want to spend a lot of time just because it's bottom of the barrel and the Dolphins don't look very good. But I wanted to focus on Miami defensively because this is going to be something that is going to work against them here against Tampa Bay, especially against a quarterback like Tom Brady whose numbers are pristine when he's kept clean. But how about this in terms of the Dolphins being desperate for a pass rush? They blitzed the second most amount of dropbacks percentage-wise in the National Football League. And yet they are 14th in pressure rate. They only have 7 sacks. And as a result, their defensive backs have actually been playing pretty well. But if you look at it, defensive average depth of target, 8.2 yards downfield. They've given up the 25th least, or I always confuse my phrasing there, but they're 25th in air yards allowed at this point in the season. So while their defensive backs in terms of coverage, if you look at it from a PFF grading standpoint, have been performing very well, they have to operate for so long because there's so much time to throw for opposing quarterbacks that at the end of the day, their secondary has suffered because of this. And then we can talk about how poor their offensive line has been. Jacoby Brissett's held up in pressure quite a bit, but overall, he hasn't had anything in terms of this offense. We just talked about how bad their offense is. Like 10.5 seems like a lot in a National Football League game, but you can't find me making a case for Miami this weekend.
No, I'm not going to make the case for the Dolphins either. I think this is where the Buccaneers offense is going to, let's say, get right after really struggling against the Patriots on Sunday night. And the Dolphins are having so many problems offensively, JVT. That makes everything more difficult for the defense as well.